Joshua
Hey,
Shimkin,
how
my
you
man.
doing, Marquise?
I'm good. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
For the listeners and the viewers, today's going to be a really interesting podcast. I'm excited to have my friend here, Josh Shimkin. Josh and I go back, now probably a decade, and Josh has got such an interesting story in history and brings a lot to the world of marketing and growth. And I'm excited to hear his perspectives and to have his perspectives shared with each of you. So, Josh, I'd like to jump right into it, man.
Let's do it. Ready?
So before we maybe get into some of the nitty gritty, I think you in particular have a very interesting entry point to growth. I'd go so far as to say that what you were doing when you were doing it, where you were doing it, wasn't even probably seen or known as growth. But and this was maybe 15, 16 years ago.
Yep.
Politics.
Yeah.
So tell our listeners a bit about that and maybe connect it all the way through to what you're doing now, and just sort of share some of the lessons that you've acquired along that path.
Sure. Yeah. When we talked a little bit about this podcast
Yeah.
and the subject matter, it really struck a chord with me that I've been doing this type of work since I worked on Howard Dean's presidential campaign in 2003 and 2004. And that's because even back then, and that was my first experience working in digital, and people still called it digital like that.
I still call it digital.
I know. It hasn't. It's funny how it hasn't. We haven't lost that
Yeah.
convention, right? To separate digital from other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's often because it is specialized because there's just so much to know around the marketing tech stack and actually what are the tools available to even accomplish all this digital work and interactive work. But back then in 2003, 2004, if ever, for the people who remember Howard Dean's presidential campaign, it was really the first time blogging and online fundraising became a marketing tool.
Sure.
Something that really was the precursor to what we call growth marketing today, and how that the use of that rapid publishing online and the rapid email messages that would come in 2 to 3 times a day to update you on what the tally was for the fundraising and that we only had that much more to go.
Yes.
All that was created by Howard Dean's presidential campaign. And I was one of many team members who were involved in that. By no means was I part of the core group, but I was watching it, and I was say broadly part of the communications team. And it really was, it was an all hands effort because in politics, as you know, everybody needs to help with fundraising. Everybody needs to help with field, even if your title is X.
Yes.
You're going to get roped into sitting on a corner in New Hampshire, holding a sign for your candidate at 8:00 in the morning, no matter what role you have, from the most senior to the most junior. And it was an exciting time, but it was really that first time I experienced what was possible and what growth could really look like. And it's only with 15 years can I look back and say, like, oh yeah, that was growth.
That was it.
Right.
Awesome. So this is 2003, 15, 18 years ago. Walk the listeners through what your journey has been, because I think you were in sales for a bit in New York. And then, around the time we met 10 years ago, you launched your own startup. And I think that was one of several. And then from there, your, I guess, most recent foray has been leading growth work and now marketing work in the fintech space. So, so what I'd like to ask is maybe, take us forward from the days of Dean and give us a snapshot of your career and the sort of growth related aspects of it to date. And then from there, I'd like to maybe jump off a little bit and sort of talk more squarely about growth and your perspectives on it, how you see it, etc.
Great, sure. So let's go back to 2004 then.
Okay.
Howard Dean leaves the presidential race
Yeah.
in New Hampshire. I end up working with some of my colleagues from the Dean campaign and start a online community building agency
Okay.
called Echo Ditto at the time. It's now called Echo and Co.
Okay.
And that was really taking all that online fundraising and online advocacy work that we had started to really learn how to do,
Mm.
and you could say we had perfected it since we started it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
was doing it better because we were the ones who had started it,
Right.
and then offer that to nonprofits, political organizations, and businesses.
Okay.
So I did that for 2 years. It was great. I was technically employee number one,
Okay.
and that frankly brought me. I got to work with big nonprofits again, thinking about how do you use digital tactics for
Mm.
growth.
Sure.
We just measured growth by how much money you were raising, or how many signatures were on an online petition, or how many. Back then there were no likes,
Okay.
but it would have been likes on
Yeah.
a given post of something. How
Mm.
many comments? No, that was absolutely a KPI back then. Was how many comments were things getting to show engagement, right?
Yep.
Um, and that was fantastic. Did that for a couple of years. Went to business school. Went to NYU Stern Business School.
Nice.
After that, so graduated 2008, and then went to Marvel Entertainment. And that's really
Okay.
where my first key experience was from just a breadth and depth of
Mm.
work.
Okay.
I was there for 6 years, and I led business development and marketing for the digital media group at Marvel.
Oh, well.
And I started right 2 months after the first Iron Man film
Oh,
was
yeah.
released.
Perfect
And
timing.
yeah, I mean, I walked in the door, and I mean, everybody was excited to say the least.
Yeah.
Nobody would expected that film to do as well as it did, and it showed me the power, not just then, but over that 6 years, the power of loyalty
Mm.
for a brand. I mean,
Mm.
Marvel is certainly, no question about it, expanded its relevance.
Yeah.
More people know who Spider-Man and the Hulk are
Yes.
today than ever before. But I think what I really took away from it from a growth marketing perspective was loyalty, and
Mm.
just how to connect the dots for those core customers who
Yes.
not only love what you do, but want more of it. So how do
Yes.
you give them that more,
Yes.
and then create that advocacy, so that they can bring in their
Yes.
friends through word of mouth and through their experiences.
So
So I did,
push
yeah,
virality for you,
yeah.
basically. Yeah.
So after 6 years there, I decided to take a break and went on vacation to
Yeah.
a lovely little place called Cape Town, South
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
Thought I'd only be here for 2 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, for 2 months. Have now been here many years,
Yeah.
and started my own business here because I was just, as you know, just so enthralled with the startup culture of
Yeah.
Cape Town, the access to high quality developers, the access to incredible marketing thought and thought
Yeah.
leadership. So I started a business that bundles the excess capacity at fitness studios
Mm.
and gyms, and then sells that at a discount to people who want to go experience a yoga studio,
Yeah.
or a hit fitness gym
Sure.
at off times,
Okay.
so that they can get a discount. And
Yep.
then so we would sell access to this network of studios
Yeah.
and gyms in class packs to people. And of course, the beauty of that, the business is called FitKey.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is it lets you buy one class pack and use it at multiple studios.
Sure.
So you don't have to have separate contracts with separate class packs at
That's
separate
right.
studios.
Right.
And I did that for, I started that with a business partner. I launched it and helped operate it for about a year and a half. And then it
Okay.
became clear that we both couldn't do that and keep the burn rate of the business
Yeah.
at a minimum. So I left it to let my business partner run it. And that's when I got, actually, that was my first foray really getting into B2B work, because I
Okay.
started working for a company called Brand's Eye, and that
Yeah.
was in the social intelligence space.
Yeah.
And social intelligence and opinion mining is, in essence, using Twitter data, Facebook data, all that publicly available social media data, and understanding the sentiment of how customers experience a brand.
Okay.
So if you want to know what people think about Nike, you can aggregate all that Twitter data and Facebook data. And what was special about Brand's Eye is the aggregation is not the special part. What was special was they would then put a sample set of that data to human beings to
Okay.
really to determine what was the sentiment, positive
Sure.
or negative. What did people actually think about it? Because when you were talking about natural language processing, it's actually a very difficult thing for a computer to do reliably.
Mm.
And so my job was to find more clients. I was in the sales team, and it was fantastic from a growth and marketing perspective for me, because it was the first time I was really in a sales job with a target
Sure.
and had to go out there and just figure out how to close deals.
Sure.
And that led me into thinking more about growth, wanting to still be entrepreneurial. And when I was at FitKey, I was using Peach Payments as our payment gateway for
Okay.
processing the online subscriptions that people would pay every month. And
Yeah.
so I got to be very familiar with Peach. And when they wanted to step up their game and really, they'd found product market fit, but they needed to really broaden their awareness um, and and hit much more dramatic growth targets.
Sure.
They brought me in to start that growth experience, which has now created a marketing team and an SME sales team,
Okay.
because we've grown so much that we need that level
Yeah.
of separation.
Yes. Wow. Okay. So much in there. A lot to unpack. I wanna start at the end. Maybe paint a quick picture on the state of Peach Payments when you arrived.
Hmm.
This was several years ago. What was the environment like? What was the appetite like for this thing called growth? Because even today, you don't hear, like when you hear the term growth thrown around, it sort of connotes a certain, number of things about, the founders, the business, the mentality. And for our listeners, you know, we started and do this podcast because we believe that there are tons of businesses out there who have found product market fit either recently or they've been in it for a long time, and they are really just trying to make sense of what happens online. How do you make things happen online? Because the environment now is more constrained, and it's I think folks are rightfully so reaching the conclusion that without having a solid online presence, the future is bleak. And I say that because I think that this framing really will help set the context for people who are like, wow, this guy Josh, his stories are awesome, but you know that environment was so different from the environment that I'm operating in, right?
Mm.
He was hopping into a digital first company, and I started selling bricks in a physical location, and there's no way that someone wants bricks to buy bricks online or whatever the case might be. So
Mm.
I think help frame the context that you arrived at Peach Payments, that you arrived into at Peach Payments,
Hmm.
and then how you sort of made sense of the world and what you were going to do to drive this growth that Peach Payments wanted to pursue. Sorry, that was a lot. Uh, short version of the question is shape for us what the environment was like when you arrived at Peach Payments. They had this ambitious target. We want to grow. We want to double down. So describe what was going on in the company, the team, the structure, the operating environment outside of the company that you had to sell into. And then from there, I think we can just get maybe more into some of the nitty gritty.
Sure. Peach in 2018 was 25 people. It had established itself as a leader in the enterprise space
Okay.
for payments and processing payments.
Okay.
But it recognized that for the next cycle of growth, it needed to have a much more focused part of the business on small and medium-sized businesses.
Okay.
The business was incredibly well organized and structured for high-touch enterprise sales
Okay.
that required 12 to 18 months lead time before
Yeah.
anything was closing and actually live on our platform. But the business owners knew that wasn't enough and shouldn't be enough. The technology could absolutely serve a smaller or medium-sized business.
Yeah.
And the technology could absolutely serve business owners who wanted to use an e-commerce platform like Wix, WordPress and WooCommerce, or Shopify instead of creating their own custom platform.
Yeah.
And so I was brought in to be literally the very first marketing growth employee. And the challenge was, how do we do that process that we generally now take 12 to 18 months to do in a very high touch, people first experience? How do we do that online? And instead of it being 12 to 18 months, how do we do that in, anywhere from a day to 7 days?
Mm.
How do we keep the experience positive? How do we keep the experience high touch, but it be a digital experience and high touch for the digital environment?
Sure.
So you have to put one foot in front of the other. I mean, this is the problem so many people make is generally by this time in the business, you've cobbled together your product. It's 80% awesome, one thing that you built custom, and 20% this cobbling together of other things that you've just had to use to make things work.
Sure.
But you haven't had the budget or the time to make it really, truly a holistic product that would be your dream, right?
Yes. And I think to add to that, not only, do a lot of the businesses get to that point in that way, the other point is that when they get there and they know that something needs to change oftentimes, they're like, but this is going to be such a big task. I don't even know where to start. And so inertia takes over and it just becomes much easier to kind of carry on the way that we've been doing,
Yep. Okay.
But,
So I've got some things immediately that come to mind to make business owners feel better about this. They shouldn't beat themselves up about it. Everybody feels that way, whether
yeah.
you're the brick seller
Yes.
or you're the digital marketing agency.
Yes.
That's because it often feels like there's just too much to do. Where do I start? Right?
Yeah.
And so the way I approach that part of the journey is I first say to myself, what can I do that only I need to control to make a difference in the business?
Mm.
And I often start at the bottom of the funnel, the end of the funnel, rather than
Yeah.
the beginning of the funnel. So for
Sure.
people who don't understand a funnel, that's the lingo growth marketers often use to talk about the lead process, right? The process from someone just hearing about your business and then going through all those stages in awareness to conviction to actually wanting to spend money with you
Yeah.
and becoming a customer.
And then evangelism.
And then, right. And then
Yeah.
loving your experience so much and the service that they want to tell everyone about it
Yeah.
because they probably have other peers in the business and that makes them look good, right?
Absolutely.
If they know something that someone else doesn't, that is right? we all know that makes you look good, that makes you feel good, and that's where evangelism comes from.
Yep.
So I start at the back of the funnel, not the front of the funnel, because 1% change in the back of the funnel gets me more customers than 1% change at the top of the funnel. Right?
Sure.
If I
Yep.
improve anything closer to that end process, I'm going to get more customers. So
Yep.
I always approach my work back to front, and and so then I look at the business. So fintech business. Okay, why weren't people? We would take all this time sometimes to get people onboarded and through the system, signing our contracts, doing the minimal amount of tech work they needed to do to get their system set up, and then they wouldn't start trading. Well, why
Mm.
wouldn't they start trading? They've done all the work. All they
Yep.
need to do is put it, make it live on their website. So I did a lot of insight work. I would talk to the merchants. I would survey them. I'd ask them, what's going on? Tell me why
Yep.
can't you do it? And you'd hear all these different answers. But after you do enough of them, and you don't need to do 20 or 30, frankly, you often hear the same thing after 5.
Yep.
And then it's focusing on if I only do one thing in the next 2 weeks, I only want to solve that one problem.
Yeah.
Don't try to solve everything at once. Take that one problem and just solve that one problem and solve
Yes.
it in a way that you can control yourself. You don't need 2 or 3 other people, right? And so it may look a little funky. It may look a little janky,
Yeah.
right? Of course, we all want to have a minimum threshold that we'd never let it be below because it would
Slip
look
below.
unprofessional. But
Yeah.
there's professional and then there's like elegant and premium.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think to have the growth mindset, you have to be okay with good instead
Yeah.
of perfect, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you're going to
Yes.
be operating on good for a very long time
Yeah.
before you actually want to take the time and money to make something perfect,
Yep.
right? And that
100%.
comes from that testing mentality that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
where the fintech, I mean, that's what it was like, starting at Peach, where it
Sure.
was just about finding those problems early in the funnel, making a difference and making it good enough,
Yeah.
and then finding the next biggest problem and walking my way up the
Yes.
funnel.
Yes. 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 Super interesting. And there's so much in what you said, but one thing that I want to come back to is this idea of getting in touch with your customer,
Mm,
understanding your customer, understanding, something you and I have talked about a lot, their jobs, what jobs do they have to be done,
mm,
needs and outcomes that sort of support those jobs that they're looking to go after. Um, that was one very interesting thing that I think we can come back to. But one that I've heard in perhaps every interview I've done thus far with entrepreneurs, particularly ones whose product is steeped in some sort of there's an aesthetic dimension to the product, right? So they're selling, clothing, or they're selling a premium product. This idea that good should not be the enemy of great,
mm,
right? Good enough is a thing. Let's paint a visual picture of what in your initial experiments at the bottom of the funnel, um, how did good enough manifest, and how might that thing have looked? Were you going for the premium version of the
mm.
adjustment of the experiment?
Sure. The one good example would be, taking user interests, customer interests, and rather than having them need to um, sit in some console that everyone has access to and make sure
Mm,
that that's an integrated console um, that feeds into all of our systems. It was a Google sheet, right?
mm,
It was something that I could control,
mm,
and it was easy for me to use and manage. And I think you know the the key in this work is find something that's working, that you get that relative level of change, right? You've improved something from 5% to 15% to
yeah,
30%, right?
yeah,
But often when you're starting something new, that's not that many customers yet,
sure,
right? That might only be 10 or 20 or 30, right?
yeah,
You can manage the status of 30 customers,
yeah,
right? Um, when that becomes 300 or 3,000,
Yeah.
that's when automation and perfection comes into play, right?
Mm.
That's when you shouldn't be relying on manual interventions, and you need to have a systemic automated system to be
Yes.
able to handle that volume, right?
Yes.
But in early days, you just need to make it work for you,
Yeah.
something that you can control, and make the customer feel like they're having that type of high touch experience that they'll
Yes.
love, but they don't need to know how the sausage was made, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I think people feel like too early in that process, all the things have to line up, all the
Yes.
I's have to be dotted and the T's have to be crossed.
Yes.
It's just, if you do that, you'll be sacrificing growth for perfection.
Yes.
And I don't know a business owner that actually wants to make that sacrifice.
100%. Yeah. Especially now, I think where, you know, the stakes, and what's at stake for this, unnecessary desire for perfection in some cases means sort of you no longer exist, you
Mm.
know. Um, so I want to take a little bit of a step back to the environment that you stepped in at Peach Payments, and let's talk about some of the actors, right? So this is orchestrating growth, and the idea behind that is that growth, while it can start as a one person show and ultimately blossom into something, um, you've got many pieces that really need to come together and be orchestrated for true growth to take place, right? So the conductor of the orchestra may in fact be the head of growth, or maybe the head of marketing, but you need the CEO, you need the head of engineering or product or UI UX designers and or an analyst. So talk to me about the sort of the pieces of the Peach Payments orchestra, and how you sort of begun to sort of get everything to work together and to play nicely as you guys began to really pursue
Mm.
growth hard.
Sure. So it started out as me.
Yeah,
So, like I said, I did things the way that I could do it, and
yeah,
I'm a huge fan of all the off-the-shelf marketing services that you can use today. Think of anything in the marketing toolkit, and there's a SaaS platform that
yeah.
just can give that to you off the shelf right now for $20 a month.
Mm.
I mean,
Not
there's
bad.
yeah, I mean, you'll get limited functionality.
Yeah,
You won't be able to use it for 300 customers, maybe just
yeah,
30,
yeah,
but you'll be able to test it, right? To know, is it worth spending now $1,000 on it
yeah,
because it actually works for you, right?
yeah,
So what I would do is I would myself create systems that I could control. I have a little bit of design experience. I don't have any software development experience. So I would, that was the sandbox I was in.
yeah.
And so I would do things and create experiences that I knew I could control, and we got some success.
Right.
So there was things started to work. So I hired a designer and a front end developer, because that at the end of the day is the core growth team,
Sure.
right? I would call myself the strategist,
Yeah,
um, and that core team is really all you need to unlock growth work and good ideas, right?
sure.
And iterate, figuring out what those things are, testing them quickly, and either tweaking them or finding a better idea,
Sure.
and having 2 week sprints that give you focus, um, but also force you to make decisions,
Sure.
and to measure things. I'm a big
Sure.
big believer in the lean startup methodology, which is
Yeah,
all about building something so that you can measure it, and then learning from those measurements so that you can rebuild it
sure.
and improve upon it.
Sure.
And for anyone who hasn't read that book, The Lean Startup, I highly recommend it. It is the methodology that I think all entrepreneurs should take into their business.
Yeah,
Um, and so that's what the growth team has looked at Peach, and now we just keep evolving it. Right now, instead of one strategist, one developer, one designer. It's two developers, two designers, or
Yeah.
one plus a half. And then I'm now stepping away from that and handing it to someone who can just focus in on that full time, because now we're doing more things top of the funnel, right? We're doing more
Yes.
work that's about brand awareness because we've had success. So now we can invest in other things that are higher up in the funnel.
Mm.
And so my time is now split amongst other activities because we've been successful. But when you're just starting out and you just need to focus on what's that next thing, I would say three those three team members are core
Yeah.
for a growth
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. Early days, like, okay, I'm gonna begin setting up my growth program like tomorrow, today. It's basically you and sort of let's call it a lean marketing technology stack, all off the shelf.
Uh-huh.
Sort of phase two, or let's say 1.5, is you, a designer, developer, and then phase three, which I suppose after phase two, and perhaps all of these phases can differ depending on the company, the industry,
Sure.
but afterwards, it basically, for you at Peach, you were further up the funnel. And now you've got sort of a strategist looking primarily after bottom of the funnel, middle and bottom of the funnel growth work, and then you split your time with more top of the funnel, general marketing, brand awareness, and
Mm-hmm.
some activation work. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome, 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 awesome. Cool. Um, so I think you've got a really interesting story. I mean, if there was sort of like a docu series on how to set up a growth program on a lean budget, and get
Mm.
something going, get a fire started. I think your story has been, at least it seems to me, has been like that. Um, but I also think it's very valuable for folks to understand the underbelly.
Mm.
So,
Sure.
um, you know, when those experiments start running and like they're all failing,
Mm. Yeah.
or you've got um, problem solution fit, but haven't you're struggling to find product market fit. You've also, I'm sure, I don't know if this was the case at Peach, but there are obvious instances where um, players in the growth team are keen. The business supports the idea of growth in theory, but
Mm.
maybe management or the CEO or something, they're like, if we can't measure it, maybe not if we can't measure it, but if everything can't be attributed, then this seems like we're just burning money. I don't care about your learnings. Um,
Yeah.
we're burning money, right? So there's this dark side of growth, and maybe dark side's a bit harsh, but there is this um, there is a side where things don't sound cool, and things are failing, and you're one and you should be three. So maybe talk to us a little bit about what your experiences have been, whether it's been in Peach or in past business experiences.
So there's two pieces of this. Now, the way you frame this is saying you understand the solution for the problem. You just haven't created the product yet,
Mm,
right?
okay.
Okay, so there's a lot in that. I'm going to
Yeah.
go with that assumption
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
change any one of those variables and how you have to react changes a little bit.
Sure.
But in broad strokes, I would say the two big pieces are uh, it means you have to double down on that insight work. It
Mm,
means, you know, you understand what someone's trying to accomplish, what your customer is trying to accomplish. You just haven't created the thing that gets them to accomplish that thing efficiently
sure.
on some level. So um, certainly testing things out, but I always say, you got to step back then, and you got to do it for someone in a really custom way. When I'm faced with that challenge, I literally want to be doing that thing for that person myself,
Mm,
and that's it. No technology.
sure.
A piece of paper, a phone.
Mm.
Like, forget about writing anything, any landing pages or
Yeah.
it's how would, if I had to do all this myself, what would I do?
Yeah.
And that's where putting your, stepping into the shoes of your customer
Sure.
matters so much. And so that's why so many good entrepreneurs feel the pain point themselves, right?
Yeah.
They intuitively get what needs to happen because they've lived that pain for so
Sure.
long.
Sure.
And I think that solves it, right? Because if you can't figure it out for yourself and provide that level of an excellent customer experience using just your own means, then you'll never know how to productize it,
Mm.
right? So you always have to just go back to the customer and really, and it's annoying and it takes time
Yeah.
and customers don't get back to you as quickly as you want them
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And it feels like what you thought would take a week takes 2 months,
Yeah.
always,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling that way, don't feel like somehow your customers are different. I've never been somewhere where I am inundated with customer insights that are meaningful.
Yeah.
It's easy to get replies on sort of auto emails that
Yeah.
say like, you did a good job.
Yeah.
That's easy. That's a click of a button.
Yeah.
But to get
Yeah.
that real insight. So I would say when you're in the dumps and you don't know where to go, you have to come and you have to call up your customers and you have to
Mm.
solve that for them yourself
Yeah.
in a simple way and then start automating it for yourself, right?
Mm.
What would you want to be able to make your life easier?
Yeah.
And then that'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah. 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 That's awesome. Really, 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 I think useful insight. I'm gonna do sort of a quick. I've never done this before, but I think there's been so much that you've shared. I want to maybe call out a few books. So the one, the Lean Startup, Eric Ries. Certainly a great read if you haven't already checked it out, and you don't necessarily have to be in a startup. I think just the methodology and the mindset that Eric Ries has sort of laid out really can apply to any business at any stage. But Lean Startup is one. I think Lean Customer Development. So Lean is a movement that has been started by this book by Eric Ries, The Lean Startup. But another book that I find really useful is the Lean Customer Development. I think author is Cindy Alvarez, if I'm not mistaken. And then there is one other that came to mind. I don't know. I will think of it and plop it back. Were there any that you wanted to mention, Josh?
Sure, you pick some great ones. I'll go to a sales book that I'm a
Okay.
huge evangelist for. It's called The
Okay.
Challenger Sale.
Huh.
There are very few sales books that don't read like a sales book,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There are very few books that's just like, go out there and win more customers,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
they're trying to get you to go to the weekend retreat
Yeah.
for $5,000,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so I tried, and so I was really disenchanted with understanding sales as a skills-based discipline,
Yeah.
rather than just a psychological thing. Like some people are good and some people are bad, and you
Yeah.
can't learn it, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely not the case. Greatest book I've ever read about sales is called The Challenger Sale. And it is a methodology that anyone can use for
Okay.
enterprise sales, right? This
Okay.
is about a high touch sales process. This is
Yeah.
not about an automated sales process, although there are many learnings you can take from it. And it would be a whole nother podcast to talk about that. And in
Okay.
fact, there are tons talking
Yeah.
about it. So go search it and read it. It's a great read. And what it does is it gives you a framework that will open your eyes to how a sales target needs to be educated
Yeah.
to be able to understand why what you're providing them is important and better
Okay.
than your competitors.
Interesting. I actually don't think I've read that, but strangely enough, I do remember. I think we had just gotten together or something like that in Cape Town shortly after you read it, and I remember you talking about this book like it changed my outlook.
I've had job interviews where I end up only talking about this book, and
That's awesome.
across the table, they're all looking at me like, like they're really. I mean, they're into it, and they
Yeah.
haven't read the book.
Mm.
Now, I've not gotten those jobs, but the feedback was,
Yeah.
I'll never forget you because I want to go read that book.
That's awesome, man.
It is because I also think it's so unique because there's so few sales books that nail it. You know,
Mm,
there are a lot of marketing books
sure,
that I think speak to really important topics, and you can
sure.
go, you know, you can really run the gamut of marketing books, and whether it's brand or
Yeah,
performance, tons of stuff. Sales, it's very hard to find a meaningful book, I think.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. And then the last one, it came to me as you were speaking was so we've got the Lean Startup, Eric Ries, Lean Customer Development, Cindy Alvarez, Challenger Sales, and Jobs to Be Done, Tony Olwick.
Mm. Oh
Classic
yeah,
book.
well, the it's the one that I know you and I also love is when kale competes with coffee.
Yes,
Right?
when coffee and kale compete, I think
Yeah.
something like that. But yes, it's confusing,
Just
but
search
definitely
kale and
kale
coffee,
coffee.
and you're
Yeah,
gonna find
exactly,
it.
exactly, for
Great
sure,
book.
man,
Also, great
for sure.
book. Great book. Classic way of understanding. You know, when someone buys a hammer and a
Yeah,
nail,
yeah,
really all they want is a hole.
yeah,
Right? So how do you
yeah.
get that hole if you don't need a hammer and a nail,
Yes,
right? And
yes,
that sums up that book with some great examples and really will leave you feeling like yeah, that the job of sales and marketing is a profound job
mm,
of psychology and for solving tough problems.
sure,
And that's why I love that jobs to be
sure.
done framework.
No, it's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing. Um, so there's one thing that came to mind actually as we were talking about these books and jobs to be done. The concept came to my
Mhm.
mind. We're talking about customers and jobs to be done. For anyone who's not familiar, who hasn't read it, is it's I mean, you and I joked about this quite a lot, Josh, but it's a tricky concept to wrap your mind around. But when you do, you'll really never see the world the same. Um, and and I personally, I remember, my first days in product development and technology, and then into growth. There were a lot of things that were just very unintuitive. And I'll give you personal examples. Um, One is this idea. The analogy that I sometimes use is, if you're um, we have not been primed, like, growing up, nobody ever says like, go to high school and see if you finish, or go to college and, if you finish, cool, but don't worry about it. It's really just the process of stepping a foot onto a college campus, right? Nobody says that, and um, oftentimes with in product development, at least, they're like sort of build the MVP. Don't worry about the spaceship, right? So effectively, they're telling you to sort of build it good enough, which is this concept
Yeah.
we touched on before, right? If I asked you, Josh, to build a house for me, you wouldn't build it just good enough, because I would pay you, our friendship would be over, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Um, and you know, I think particularly when you're running ads and in building product, you do strive for perfection. And so one of these counterintuitive aspects is the idea of like, imperfection and just good enough, etc. You touched on that earlier. Another one is, you know, the funnel. You're sort of working along two dimensions, right? Because you've got your channels along sort of a horizontal axis, and then you've got your funnel along a vertical axis, and you've got experiments running simultaneously at different stages in the funnel across different channels, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's, to drive a car, you wouldn't, drive a car, read a book, have a foot on the gas, a foot on the brake, and effectively, this is kind of there's a multiplicity of activities that are happening when you're online. And oh, by the way, this is all happening behind a computer. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
um, you can't actually see it, so you have to wrap your head around the complexity of that. Last example I'd give um, was for one of our partners, e-commerce retail brand. They they really sort of didn't understand the magnitude of what it meant to be online, right? They had a product, it went viral, and viral for them was sort of like, our sales quadrupled. Um, and the question they had for me was, how long do you think this could go on? And I said, well, there's 6.5 billion people in the world, 4 billion on Facebook. I think we have potentially a lot of runway in front of us. I mean, obviously, 4 billion is an exaggeration, extreme exaggeration, but people don't really understand the immense scale of of what you can do and who you can reach and where you can reach them online. So I've gone probably into too much detail across too many examples, but it'd be good to hear from your perspective if there are any of these things. Again, speaking to entrepreneurs, which is what we're doing. They'll be listening, watching, etc. There are these things that had I known before, my mind would have been right. I would have had some insight into, oh wow, okay, $100 investment on Facebook could get me, 50,000 in sales returned. So, any examples from your side what people can expect?
Sure.
So,
Yeah, I guess I would say if you're starting out, just focus on search ads. Just focus on search ads. Don't worry your brain with everything else yet.
sure.
Find someone who can do some great search marketing for your business, because those are going to be the people with the highest intent for
Yeah.
what you're selling. So you're going to be focusing on the best possible digital customer you can. And then that's where you want to start refining, right? So yes, it's really easy to go to Facebook and throw some money at Facebook and get some leads, but they're probably going to be low quality or
Sure.
lower quality leads.
Sure.
And then you're going to lose your focus on what you need to do to improve this idea that you have. So I always say you got to start with search and just to search for a little while, until you hit a volume where, in fact, if you increase budget, you're actually not going to get a
Much
cost-effective
more
lead,
return. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when you need to start branching out and doing other channels, and you'll go to Facebook, so that you're building more awareness for what you're doing, and then that's going to drive intent on search and people searching for what you're doing, and then that's the loop that you want to start
Sure.
investing in.
Josh, I think we're going to have you back on the podcast at some point in the not too distant future. And I'd love
Anytime.
to maybe just deep dive into like a single topic and go deep. But for now, we're going to have to wrap it up.
I love it. It just feels like a normal Friday for us talking with
Yeah.
with a drink in our hands.
Exactly. The only thing missing is alcohol.
That's right.
For sure, man.
This is normal conversation for you and I. I love the fact that we get to share it with other people who care
sure.
care a lot about that entrepreneurial journey and
Yeah.
take this kind of stuff seriously, and it's really fun. So of course, anytime.
Awesome, Josh, man. Well, dude, I can't thank you enough. I'm sure the listeners are going to be singing your praises, but super grateful for you. And yeah, that's a wrap, man. Thanks for joining us, Josh.
Sure, thanks.